everybody. I'm going to go over the rise and spread of Islam, which covers chapters 6, 7, and 8 from the Stearns book. We've already begun our study in class, so I'm going to kind of zoom through the first part up into the Abbasids. Use your brown book to kind of fill in some of the blanks as an outline. Use your blue book for any concepts that you might need a little bit of extra assistance on. So we will begin here by moving along. You can watch the videos on your own on my website. Arabian Peninsula is pastoral nomads running around. The people that lived there were called Bedouin, and they relied on oases to sustain them. They had a clan identity led by a sheikh or a sheik. In the Bedouin clan identity, women would have a little bit higher position than we might have seen elsewhere. There wasn't, when we look at the Persian chart, the political was pretty much sheikh clan identity. Economic was pastoral nomadism. Religion was sort of a blend of polytheism, animism. There was some, it's syncretic, there's a mix, which I'll discuss in a little bit. So trade is developing across the Arabian Peninsula because, as you can see here, we've got India right off over this way. We've got the Mediterranean right up over here. So the Silk Road comes along this way, but part of it is sea routes which come down through the Arabian and then into the Indian Ocean. So trade is very active in this part of the world. As a result, Mecca is a trade crossroad, a very important place, not just because it's an oasis, but also because it features the Kaaba, which is the black stone, the temple, the shrine, the religious shrine that is now central for Muslims. But early on, inside this temple, there was a lot of idols and polytheistic god representations that was important to people throughout the peninsula, and so it was important to people in the area for that reason, because of trade, but also because of religion. It's an open-air market, a bazaar, and there was a truce there that dealt with people having peace, not fighting while they were in Mecca. So it was kind of it was already a prominent place before Islam. Then we see Medina, al-Madinah, or before then it was called Yathrib, before Islam. It's a trade center as well, but it's got quarreling families who are Jewish and Bedouin that are fighting for control over the city. So before Islam, I'm going to leave it just like this. You can pause yourself. Before Islam, it was not developed. It was mostly oral traditions, animistic, polytheistic, syncretic, which syncretic is a blend of multiple religious beliefs. And it's important to remember that Christians and Jews both have been in this region for centuries. But what we also see is that religion is not a main part of life. So then the story, here's our timeline beginning for the age of Islam, beginning with the birth of Muhammad. Now the reason we see it as a focus on Islam is because this is really the first trans-regional and what we could call at the time global civilization. Rome was kind of limited to the Mediterranean. The Han was kind of limited to China. Not kind of, it was. The Gupta was limited to India. The Islamic Empire goes throughout the Middle East, across North Africa, up into Europe, and then eventually even butts up into India. So it's a trans-regional, we could kind of say the first global civilization, so that's important. But it begins with Muhammad, who was a merchant, coming from a merchant family. He would participate in the caravans, trading goods, and as a result he had a lot of contact with different religions, different people. He found that in Mecca there was a lot of greed. There was just sort of like what we saw with Siddhartha Gautama. He came to experience parts of life that he didn't like and didn't really understand. So he would walk in the hills and meditate and pray, and Muslims believe that he was visited by the angel Gabriel, who said, Muhammad, speak. And so he went back to Mecca preaching what later on was written down as the Quran. Important to note the family tree beginning with Abraham, that Abraham had a son Isaac, who is the progenitor of the Jewish people and then later Christianity, and on the other side is Ishmael, who Muslims trace back from Muhammad back to Ishmael, both sons of Abraham. So the words that he was given were written down into the Quran. You'll also see it spelled K-O-R-A-N. But the Quran, Muslims believe, is the direct word of God, and it's sort of like a trilogy. Judaism is part 1, Christianity is part 2, and the denouement finale is Islam. The full and complete revelation is the Muslim belief. So the hijrah is, Muhammad goes back to Mecca with his message that he says he's been given from God, which is be kind to one another, be good to the poor, stop the greed and all that, and stop worshiping all these other gods, these idols. Well, the ruling power structure, the Umayyad family, who ruled, controlled Mecca, were not that thrilled with his message, so they essentially ran him out of town. He ran for his life, went to Yathrib, which is renamed to Al-Madinah, or the city of the Prophet, and there he gathers followers, and he becomes a leader there because the quarreling families just want somebody to provide that stability of a single leader. So this is also something why the Islamic empires are different, because he is a religious as well as a political leader. Caesar, yes, was worshipped as a god, but he wasn't the head of the Roman religion. The emperor, yes, the mandate of heaven. The Chinese believe that the heavens chose the emperor, but he wasn't worshipped as a god like Caesar was, but he also wasn't in charge of the religion. Whereas Muhammad, the Muslim belief is you can't separate religion from politics, you can't separate it from everyday life, so he was the religious as well as the political leader. Skipping the video, you can watch it on your own. So the basics are the 5 pillars: pause, as needed, as necessary. The reason Islam became accepted in a region where there wasn't strong religious beliefs is for these. It provided unity. The Ummah is the community of believers. So now everybody was part of a community rather than these individual tribes that would vie for control over the oasis that they were going after. So we don't have the clan feuds continuing. It's everybody is Muslim, and so they should all get along as Muslims. It provides an ethical system, whereas before the religious beliefs were just let's keep the gods happy so we can win our war or whatever. Now it's be good so that you can have good things in your life and in your death. So it also promotes equality, the idea that God created all people equally, and so all people will be judged equally, whether rich or poor or this clan or that clan. It also provided monotheism, which goes back to the Bedouin nature, the tribal nature of pre-Islamic religion, and that is that there is no god or goddess that's more important than another god or goddess, so there's no competition, it's just one god. So it provides a lot of unity. So Muhammad dies, and then that creates a problem. Who's going to be in charge? Well, usually in patriarchal societies, the son takes over, except that Muhammad did not have a son, so there was a problem early on, right as almost as soon as Islam began. He dies, and there's 2 different camps, 2 different followers. Ali is his son-in-law and is related to him, and Abu Bakr is like his best friend, one of his first followers. So the 2 different sides, Sunni Muslims follow the idea that the caliph, or the leader, the replacement for Muhammad, should be chosen by the Ummah. Shiite Muslims believe that the leader should be related to the Prophet Muhammad in some way. So this leads to the Ridda Wars, and I always say they wanted to get rid of each other. They're trying to get rid of challenges to the succession. You have rival clans, each pushing for control, and so on. So what we see ends up happening is there were some rebellions, and people were brought back into the Ummah, brought back into the community. And so, since you can't fight fellow Muslims, you're not supposed to anyway, the option was fight outside. So this is why we see a lot of rapid expansion, because it was get territory, get land. So we see the beginning of the Umayyad Caliphate here, and this is where we see the growth. And in this map, pause, look at it, zoom in as you need, if you're able to. But what we see is in the first 100 years after the death of Muhammad, the Islamic Empire spread from India through North Africa. This is the Christian enclave of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Orthodox, what we'll see later on. But up into Spain even, which remained in the hands of the Moorish Muslims, control until the 1400s, 700 years. The Battle of Tours was fought against the Franks, which essentially kept this part, the rest of Europe, Christian, and all of this Muslim. People of the book, however, are Christians and Jews who, because Muhammad came into contact with them and got the whole idea of monotheism from the Jewish people and the Christian beliefs, they're called protected people, or people of the book being the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. And that term is zimmi, that D-H-I-M-M-I word there, zimmi. The reason they don't have to convert is because they pay a tax, a jizya. So it's a different situation for people who are Christian or Jewish. It is male dominant, although there socially everyone is equal before God. But we see early on there is a great deal of social equality to a point. But then once some of the later rulers begin adopting some of the Persian traditions, like veiling of women and things like that, we see women declining somewhat in their stature. Just like the Umayyads decline, because of the taxes, the territory, they end up declining, and they lived beyond their means. And so there's a series of revolts and rebels captured that capital of Damascus, and that's where we see the beginning of the Abbasid Caliphate in this time period here. They move their capital to Baghdad, and they convert. They integrate people who weren't converted into their community, and there's just rapid growth. We see at this point merchants and landlords grow in status. Cities are growing. This is essentially their social structure is the closer to Arab Muslim you are, the higher in society you are. The further away from being Muslim, the lower in society. So that's their social structure. So essentially, the Abbasid is a golden age. Arts, literature, science. This in part because of the Greeks and the Romans works being preserved and sort of rediscovered, plus the contact with India with mathematical and number systems. So here's some of the intellectual and artistic parts of the golden age. Universities. In order to be a Muslim, you must be able to read the Quran. So in order to be able to read, you have to be educated. So that's part of that. Calligraphy, because the Prophet Muhammad charged the people with understanding and respecting the words from the Quran. We see the written language becoming a form of artwork, but also literature. Oh, and the literature is kind of cool. That's where we see the 1001 Arabian Nights. Like this whole story of Aladdin comes from this time period of the 1001 Arabian Nights, where Scheherazade, the lady, was married to the king, and she told a story every night that was kind of a cliffhanger that the king didn't get the end of the story because he had this nasty habit of killing his wife after the wedding night. So she didn't want to die, so she kept telling him stories, and so she told him stories over the course of 1001 nights that each story ended, and it left it open for a new beginning. So the next day he would say, well, let me hear the end of the story, and then I'll kill you. So she would tell the story, and there would be a cliffhanger, and say, tell me the end of the story, and then I'll kill you. So she ended up saving her life, and he realized the errors of his ways. Oops, wrong direction. We see Muslim scholars were making advances in medicine early on, especially since at this time Europe is in what's referred to as the Dark Ages, which we'll see that later on. Mathematics, I just mentioned. Architecture. Something that's important about this is Muhammad said, don't make human figures. You can't duplicate what God has made. Plus, you might end up worshiping these statues and pictures the way the Bedouin tribes worshipped the polytheistic gods. So don't do it. Just don't try to recreate it. So this is where we see some really intricate, really beautiful, really detailed artwork. All of this is calligraphy. This is all writing that's all along the side here. And it's geometric, so it's very intricate, very detailed, and very complex, but very beautiful. Minarets are something that you should know from the AP standards. And then we see, because of Silk Road contacts, but also just because of the crafts that they were creating in the Arabian Peninsula and Middle East, textiles and craft work is important. This is going to matter when we see the Crusades. This matters, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I'm going to pause here and start chapter 7 and 8 on its own video.